My boyfriend cheated on me for 11 years, then laughed and said nobody would believe me. So I watched his whole life fall apart. I spent 11 years with a man named Shane, and for most of them I honestly believed I was the lucky one. He was the guy who made a room warmer the second he walked into it. He remembered your mother's surgery date. He carried the heavy end of the couch when somebody moved. People used to tell me, at parties, with a drink in their hand, and no idea what they were doing to me, that I had really landed on my feet with that one. I would smile and agree. That was my job for 11 years, agreeing that I was lucky. Here is the part I did not understand, until much later. When one person in a couple is beloved and the other one is just tolerated as an extension, the beloved one gets to write the story of the relationship. If we fought, it was because I was sensitive. If he vanished for a weekend, it was because he needed air and I was clingy. If something felt wrong, the entire room had already decided he was a good man. So the wrongness had to be coming from me. He never had to argue with me. He just had to let the crowd do it. And I let him, because I was 24 when we met and 35 when it ended. And somewhere in those 11 years, I traded my own read on reality for the group's read on him. I can tell you the exact moment I stopped trusting myself, though I did not recognize it as that at the time. Year 3. I found a hair tie in his car that was not mine, and I asked about it, and he did not get angry and he did not get defensive. He got sad. He looked at me with this wounded, patient disappointment and said he did not know what had happened to me, that I used to be light, that he missed the version of me who was not always checking. Then he was quiet for 2 days and I apologized. I brought it up to a friend later and she said gently that maybe I should talk to someone about my anxiety. Not about him, about me. That is what 11 years of that does. You keep noticing, constantly, and every time you notice you get taught that the noticing is the symptom. By year 8, I had a whole private filing system in my head of things I had decided not to mention, and I told myself that was maturity. That was me being an adult who does not sweat the small stuff. It was not. It was a woman who had been trained out of her own eyes. And he never had to lie to me particularly well, which I think about a lot now. He only had to lie well enough because the rest was covered by the fact that I had already agreed not to look. Things had been off for months before I said anything. Little things. His phone turning face down. A second bank alert he explained too fast. A weekend trip for a friend's birthday. And then that same friend's actual birthday turned up in a completely different month. I sat on that one for 9 days. Then I sat him down at the dining table on a Tuesday night and told him I already knew. And I laid out the 4 things I was actually sure of. It was enough. He put his head in his hands and admitted it. And then something in my stomach went cold and I heard myself say, this was not the first time, was it? He would not look at me. And it came out in pieces over the next 2 hours. And every piece was worse than the one before. He had never been faithful. Not once. Not in year 10. Not in year 6. Not in month 2. 11 years, and the entire time there was someone else. Sometimes more than one someone else. And he had gotten so good at it that lying had stopped costing him anything at all. There was no line he respected either. Friends' girlfriends, a co-worker's wife, and the one that made me put my hand over my mouth, his own brother's partner, Allegra, who had sat at our table at holidays for 6 years and hugged me goodbye every time. That is the man I had been defending. That is the man I had built a life around. But the cheating was not what broke something loose in me. It was what he did next. He watched me cry for a while, and I could see him waiting me out, the way you wait out weather. And when I told him I was done, he actually laughed. Not a big laugh. A short one. Through his nose. Like I had said something adorable. He said, done. Okay. And go where? 11 years in, at your age, with our friends. He said, you will cool off. You always cool off. You are the one who apologizes first. And then he said the sentence I am going to hear for the rest of my life. He said, and even if you do not cool off, who is going to believe you? Everybody loves me. You will just be the bitter ex. He was so calm. That was the thing. He was not threatening me. He was doing arithmetic out loud and he had already checked his work. And for about 3 weeks he was right. And that is the part that nearly finished me. I told the truth to people who had known me for a decade. And I watched their faces do this small, polite adjustment. This softening that was not sympathy. It was pity for my mental state. One of his friends actually said, come on, that does not sound like Shane. Are you sure you are not just hurting right now? Shane was ahead of me everywhere I went. He was telling people I was heartbroken and inventing things, that the breakup had hit me hard, that he was worried about me. Not angry, worried. That was the genius of it. He never once attacked me. He just kept saying, with wet eyes, that he hoped I would get help. And people ate it, because a man defending himself looks guilty, and a man grieving for you looks like a saint. I lost people that month in a way that still does not feel real. Not dramatically. Nobody told me off. I was simply included less. The Sunday group thread went quiet whenever I posted in it, and then I would find out the plans had happened anyway. A woman I had known for 9 years, whose kids I had watched for free on more weekends than I can count, sent me one of those messages that is technically kind and completely final, saying she loved us both and did not want to be in the middle and was going to step back for a while. In the middle. As though there was a middle. As though 11 years of him were a disagreement with 2 reasonable sides. And I want to say something to anybody sitting in the first 3 weeks of this right now, because I remember exactly how it feels. It feels like proof. Every person who backs away feels like confirmation that you are the problem, and it gets into you fast. There were nights I sat on my floor and seriously considered the possibility that I had misheard the confession, that I had made it bigger in my head, that maybe I was doing the exact thing he was telling everyone I was doing. That is how good he was. A man confessed to me out loud, in my own home, in full sentences, for 2 hours, and 3 weeks later I was cross-examining my own memory of it. He never needed to change my mind about the facts. He only needed me to suspect my mind. He got so comfortable he texted me, let me know when you are done sulking. I am not going to chase you. He thought it was over. It was not over, because there was one thing his whole system could not survive, and he had never had to think about it before. He had never been in a room with all of it at once. Everything he did in private, one person at a time, and every one of those people had a phone. My best friend Patty was the first one who did not flinch. I called her at midnight, sobbing, apologizing for calling, and she cut me off and said, he already called me 2 nights ago, crying. He told her I was falling apart and making things up because he had asked for space. And Patty said she let him talk for 20 minutes. And then she asked him one question. She asked him him why a man who did nothing wrong needs to call his girlfriend's best friend at midnight to get ahead of a story. She said he hung up 11 seconds later, and she wrote down the time, because something about the whole call felt like evidence to her, even before she knew what it was evidence of. That was the first thing I ever had in writing. The next morning, Patty came over with her laptop and made me do something that felt insane at the time. She made me stop talking and start collecting. Not arguing, not defending, collecting. She said every time you open your mouth to a mutual friend, you are asking them to choose between your word and his, and he wins that trade every single time. So stop trading. Go get the things that do not have a word to doubt. We started with what I already legally had. 11 years together means a paper trail whether you want one or not. We had a shared card for household things, and I pulled 31 months of statements, which was as far back as the bank would let me go online. It took 2 days. Patty sat on my floor with a legal pad, and we built a spreadsheet. And when it was done, I sat there and could not feel my hands. Hotels in our own city. Not on trips, not for work. 40 minutes from our apartment, on ordinary Thursdays. One of them 9 times in a single year. Restaurant charges for 2 on nights he told me he was at his brother's. A florist he used 4 times, and I have never in 11 years received flowers from that man. And every one of those lines had a date on it, and a time, and an amount. And no charm in the world can talk a bank statement into being a feeling. Patty made one rule that first night, and she made me repeat it back to her. We do not add anything. We do not guess. We do not write down a single thing we cannot show. If a charge had any innocent explanation at all, it went into a 4th column she labeled maybe, and by the end there were 11 items sitting in the maybe column, and we never used one of them. She said the second you let one soft thing in, every hard thing standing next to it goes soft too. She was right, and I think that rule is the entire reason any of this worked. I also want to say plainly that I did not hack anything, and I did not break into anything, because that is the first question people ask me. It was a joint account with my own name on it. I called the bank on a Tuesday morning and asked for statements the way any account holder can, and the woman on the phone pulled them up in 4 minutes and had no idea what she was handing me. That is the whole trick, if there even is one. It was never hidden. It had been sitting in an app on my own phone for 2.5 years while I was busy being told I was imagining things. He never worried about it because he knew I would not look, and he knew I would not look because he had spent a decade making looking feel like a defect in my character. The receipts were never the secret. My permission to read them was the secret. Then came the part that turned it from my story into everyone's. Patty said, "You are not the only one he did paperwork on." 2 of the women had already reached out to me in the first week, quietly, both of them apologizing, both of them clearly terrified. I had not answered either one, because at the time I could not stand to hear it. Now I wrote back and asked them one thing, not for loyalty, not for a side. I asked if they still had their messages. One of them, a woman named Rhea, sent me a folder within the hour, 14 months of it, dated, with his number on every thread, including one where he told her that he and I were basically over and just living together for the lease. That was during the year we took a trip for our anniversary. The other woman said she needed to think, and she was scared, and she was worried about her own life blowing up. And I told her I understood, and that I would not use her name, and I would not ask again. I meant it. I had been pressured into silence for 11 years. I was not going to hand that to somebody else just because it would have been convenient. She wrote back 4 days later on her own. She sent everything. And the third woman found us, because that is what happens once 2 of them start comparing. Her name was Nadia, and she had never spoken to either of the others. And she reached Rhea through a co-worker, and by the time she got to me, she already had her folder ready to send. She had kept it for 2 years without knowing why. She told me she had a feeling the whole time that eventually somebody was going to need to be believed and it was not going to be her. I sat with all 3 folders open at 2 in the morning, and what got me was not the volume. It was the sameness. He had used the same 4 lines on all of us, word for word, across different years to women who had never met. The same joke about his phone dying. The same story about a lease he was stuck on. The same line about how he had never been able to talk to anyone the way he could talk to her. I had believed I was in a relationship with a person, and it turned out I had been standing in front of a script. Rhea said something on the phone that night I have not been able to put down since. She said he was not choosing us. She said we were interchangeable and we were all being handled the exact same way. And the only thing that made her different from me was which part of his calendar she had been assigned to. What we ended up with was not a rumor, and it was not an accusation. It was a timeline. Patty actually printed it on paper because she said people believe paper in a way they do not believe a screen. 3 columns. Left column, what Shane told me he was doing that night. Middle column, the card statement. Right column, whose messages placed him where. And the columns lined up for 31 months straight, and nobody had coached anybody, and none of these women had ever met each other. Meanwhile, Shane escalated, because he could feel something moving and he could not see what it was. He stopped calling me unstable and started calling me dangerous. And then he did the thing that ended him, and he did it entirely to himself. He called his brother. Johan and I had not spoken since the confession. He had asked Allegra directly. She had broken down and admitted it, and the 2 of them had gone quiet in that way families do when the house is on fire and nobody wants to say so out loud. Then Shane called Johan and told him that I had pressured Allegra into a false confession. He said I had coached her. He said the affair never happened, and that I had put the words in her mouth to punish him. Johan called me for the first time in a month, and his voice sounded like a man reading a stranger's mail. He asked me if it was true, and I did not argue with him. I did not defend myself at all, because Patty had trained that out of me by then. I asked him a question instead. I asked him whether Allegra had ever given him a date. He said yes, several. He said she had told him a weekend in April, 2 years back, and a hotel, and he had not wanted to hear the rest. And I asked him to hold the phone away from his face for a second, and I read him the line off the statement. April, that hotel, that amount. 60 seconds after the charge, a text from Shane to me saying his phone was about to die and he loved me. Johan did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Send it to me." All of it. And I did. And I did not add a single word of commentary, and that turned out to matter more than anything I could have written. He called back the next morning and his voice was destroyed. He said he had gone back to Allegra and she had told him every detail again, shaking, and this time she gave him her own thread. and he had put her dates next to my statements himself at his dining table with a pen. He said, "My brother looked me in the face and told me my partner was a liar to save himself. He told me that was the end of it, permanently, and it was not about the affair anymore. A man can betray you and still be your brother. A man who tries to convince you that your own memory is broken is something else entirely." And then Johan did the thing I had not asked for and had not expected. He sent it on. He sent the timeline to their mother. He sent it to the two friends who had said it did not sound like Shane. He did not editorialize either. He just forwarded the columns. And I want to be clear about how this actually ended, because it was not a scene, and it was not a confrontation. There was no party. There was no room where I stood up and said something devastating and everybody clapped. That is not how it works. And honestly, if you are waiting for that moment, you are going to wait forever. What happened was quieter and much worse for him. It happened over about 9 days. In group chats I was not in. On phone calls I never heard. Because once the timeline existed, every single person who had defended him had to go check one thing. Just one. The one date that touched their own life. The friend whose wedding weekend showed a hotel charge in our city. The co-worker who now understood why Shane had been so weirdly insistent on driving her home. The two friends who had told me it did not sound like him, and who both found their own partner's names sitting in Ria's messages. Nobody had to believe me. That was the entire point. Not one of those people had to take my word over his. They just had to open their own calendar and put it next to a number on a piece of paper. And what Shane had built over 11 years was 100 separate private relationships, each one held together by his version of events. And it turned out that every single one of them fell down the second it touched the others. He had never had to keep his stories consistent, because he had never expected the audience to compare notes. I heard about it in fragments, days late, from Patty and from Johan and from people who abruptly started answering my messages again after a month of silence. Somebody's wife recognized the date on a hotel charge because it was the night she had a scan, and he had told her he could not get away. A man Shane had played basketball with every Wednesday for 6 years, read the timeline, said nothing, and never showed up again. The friend who had asked me whether I was sure I was not just hurting sent me a message 4 paragraphs long, and I read the first line and then did not open the rest for 2 weeks. And when I finally did, it was mostly about him, and I still have not answered it. That is the honest part nobody puts in these stories. When it turns, it does not feel like winning. It feels like standing in a house after the water has gone back down. People I loved lost people they loved. Allegra lost 6 years and a partner and, for a while, the ability to sit in a room with that family without her hands shaking. Johan lost a brother. Their mother lost something I do not have a word for. None of it was mine to fix, and none of it was mine to enjoy, and I did not enjoy it. Shane came to my door on the 9th day. No performance left. He looked like he had not slept, and had not eaten, and had been talking on the phone for a week straight to people who were not answering anymore. He said, "I cannot believe you did this to me." His mother had asked him not to come at the holidays. His brother had blocked him. 2 friends of 15 years had told him not to contact them again. He had been let go from a job where his best client turned out to be married to somebody in Ria's messages. And I want to be honest. I do not know all of what happened there, and I did not ask. And I stood in my own doorway and told him the truth, which was that I did not do anything to him. I did not invent one thing. I did not stretch one thing. I did not knock on a single door. I made a spreadsheet out of his own receipts and I let people read it. He said, "You have destroyed my whole life over some mistakes." And I said, "You told me nobody would believe me." You were right. Nobody believed me. They believed the statements. They believed Allegra. They believed the dates on their own calendars. I am not even in this anymore. Then he tried the last thing, the thing he had been saving, and he said it quietly with his hand on my doorframe. He said, "You were easy. 11 years, and you never once looked hard, because you did not want to know. You needed me more than I ever needed you." And here is what surprised me. It did not hurt. I stood there and felt the last of him come off me like a coat, because he was right about the old me, and that woman had spent 11 years being told her instincts were a personality flaw, and she was gone. He was still arguing with somebody who no longer lived here. I said, "That part is true, and it is the only true thing you have said in a decade." And I closed the door while he was still talking. He knocked twice more, and then I heard him walk down the stairs. It has been 4 months. Patty and I still have breakfast on Sundays. Johan texts me on the 1st of every month, just checking in, 2 lines, nothing heavy, and I text him back the same. Allegra moved out and moved on, and I hope she never thinks about any of us again. Ria and I are not friends exactly, but we send each other a message on the anniversary of the day she hit send on that folder, and I do not think either of us will ever stop. I still have the printout. Patty told me to throw it away, and I have not, and I am not going to pretend that is healthy. I keep it in the drawer under the takeout menus where it has been since the day we made it. 3 columns, 31 months, his handwriting nowhere on it, and his whole life inside it. The bottle of wine he brought over that last night is still standing on the shelf by my door, unopened, a thin gray line of dust along the foil.